Brian has the official time.
Oh, we're in.
There we go.
Okay. Good evening. It's 5 o'clock. I'll now call to order the City Council workshop for September 23rd, 2019. First, this is a workshop. First thing we're going to go over is the proposed amendment to the Agricultural and Resource Protection Zone. I'm going to turn this over to the City Manager, Peter Creighton.
So
We're going to go,
I'll
okay, I'm
chime
sorry,
in.
Assistant City Manager.
So I've been asked to facilitate tonight's meeting, so I'll do that. One thing that I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity is if they, we'll start off with introductions, and then council, mayor, if there's any comments you'd like to make prior to Peter's presentation regarding staff's overview, then we can do that as well. So if we can start with introductions, including staff, we'll start over here.
Sue Clemens-Delaire, City Clerk.
Belinda Gary, Auburn City Councilor at Large.
Holly Lasagna, Ward 1 City Councilor.
Bob Hayes, Ward 2, Council.
Andy Titus, City Council, Ward 3.
Jason Levesque, Mayor, Auburn.
Alfreda Fournier, City Councilor, Ward 4.
Leroy Walker, Ward 5, City Council.
David Young, City Council at Large.
Rosemary Mosier, GIS Manager for the City of Auburn.
Peter Creighton, City Manager.
Eric Cousins, Deputy Director, Economic Community Development.
Brett Sawyer, Economic Development.
Karen Scammon, City Assessor.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We'll start with opening comments. Mr. Mayor, if you have anything you'd like to say.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I know this is a special meeting, and I know we just had a meeting last Monday. So, I mean, the only thing I'd like to say is at this point, I'm very grateful the city staff is here. I've been researching this throughout the weekend in order to really tighten up these numbers. I'm looking forward to hearing everything, the same as you all are. I would like to say that, I think in the spirit of trying to look at a solution or a potential solution versus not looking at anything, I think is kind of the consensus I'm getting from the majority of the council here. So I'd be very encouraged to have that conversation go forward. I'll also say that to clear up any misconceptions, the ordinances that were being included in your packet that my mayor's ad hoc committee put forth are not suitable, in my opinion, for a vote. They do need to be reworked. It's just a first draft, if you would, a start of something to trigger some more conversation and to be a work in progress, if you would. So I look forward to seeing the council work and do their job on this one. It's going to be exciting, and I'm here to support you in your move forward.
Thank you. Councilor Gary? Any comments?
Not at the moment.
Councilor Lasagna?
I appreciate the mayor realizing that we need to take our time and be very thoughtful about this. Thank you.
Remember, I didn't say that, actually. Not quote. I said that the initial ordinance is not suitable for passage and needs to be reworked. So just to be clear.
So we need to take our time to do that.
Councilor Hayes?
I too heard that what we have before us needs more work, so I think we do need to spend some time doing just that. I do look forward to staff's report in particular, because I think that, staff has been working with the ad hoc committee and with the other committees before, but I think now that they've had a chance really to work through it, I'm really looking forward to their report.
Councilor Titus?
Thank you. No, I look forward to us digging into this deeper. My concern has been, what we have done is we've TO'd this to a ag study and 2 committees, and I don't think we need to TO it to another committee. I think we got enough information, or we should have. It appears as we have extremes. On one side, no development, leave it alone, and on the other side, we'd like to change the ag zone. We need to dig into these issues and see what we want to do. We should by now know, do we care about the 50% rule? Do we need to change it? Or do we care about the 10-acre rule? Do we need to change it? Do we want to develop all of the ag zone or part of it? If we can't make those choices here after all this time, I don't know how any committee is going to give us more information. So I'm hoping that we can, if we even have to go into item by item and discuss those items and decide, does it make sense or does it not make sense to go forward with this? Because all we're going to do if we keep asking for committees is it'll just bring more questions. And we can get more answers out of ourselves right now, I think. Just my opinion. Thanks.
Councilor Fournier?
Thank you. I too agree with what Councilor Titus has said. I think that we have studied this to death. We started off with a very expensive study, and we have had ad hoc committees and subsequent committees as a result. What bothers me is that we have people who have been waiting for generations to do something with their farmland, and they've had no answer, so they can't do anything. Some people have left because there's nothing they can do about it. I believe that we need to have a firm definition of what is farmland, who is a farmer, and what do we do about making things happen for them so that they can proceed and with their business. And I think we need to have discussions about the rest of the ag zone. If we're not farming the rest of the ag zone, then we need to discuss the tax differential. That's where I'm coming from. Thank you.
Councilor Walker.
Thank you. This has been a long time coming. I've talked with quite a few people just today that have owned their land for 50 years themselves. Their father or mother owned it before them. They have come to this city and they've asked to have a permit to build a house on it, and they have been told no. Why? Because either their families or other families like theirs in the agricultural forestry zone made rules that made it difficult for anyone to be able to get these permits. 55% is way out of the date today. It shouldn't even be thought about, talked about. It should have been taken off the books a long time ago. But if you do things and you try to make changes, you got to be careful, because there's always the other side of the coin that wants to either stop it or sue you if you make a mistake and make the wrong turn. But people have not been able to make the change that they want. People want their kids today to be able to build homes. They can't build a home. 50% of your earning, again, you just can't do it in today's world. 10%, 10 acres. If you own 9.5, the city says, well, you don't own that little 5%, and it's a plus or a minus, you can't build a home. That is so ridiculous in this world today, because someone goes out and measures it and you're 100 feet short, you can't build a house. You don't need 9.5 acres of land or 6.5 acres of land to build a house. You don't need 5 acres of land to farm. You can be a hobby farmer. Farmers don't like people that are called hobby farmers because they own 50 acres or 100 acres or whatever. There has been too much back and forth on what can we do, what can't we do. We need to make the changes now. No more studies, no more waiting. We've waited long enough. This has gone on way too long, and there has to be a committee to come together. And here we are, that need to have the balls to make a decision and get it over with.
Councilor Young.
I would like to have some definitions of what is a house lot and what is a 10-acre lot. I'm looking for that. I don't need the answer right now, but in my discussion with people and the mayor and other city councilors, they're talking about the house lot. Well, I assume the house lot is where the house is, but I don't know how big that is.
Okay. I think during the presentation, you're going to hear that, and so we'll make sure we highlight it if it's not going to be. So.
Okay, because, and the other thing is kind of, seems strange to me that somebody could be farming his land for all these years and then they sell it to somebody else and then this other person doesn't have to farm and they still get the discount for the acres, and that doesn't seem quite right, but I suppose if it's, they still keep the land open, maybe it accomplishes the goals we set forth when we wrote the ordinance. But I'd like to look at that too. What is the overall goal? What are we trying to accomplish here? And does the ordinance accomplish that goal?
Okay.
I guess that's all for right now.
All right, thank you. Councilor Gary, you said you had something further.
Yes, thank you kindly. Now that I listened to all you talk, I would like to also talk. I know we were elected to do a job, and you know I have the balls to follow through on anything. I'm committed to do whatever it takes. But I also know that I don't have a whole lot of knowledge in the ag zone and in agriculture. I would prefer us to form this ag commission or committee and have them take all this materials that we were presented through all the different reports. All the reports have pointed towards forming this ag committee. I know we've done our work, the good mayor has had his task force, but there's still more materials that should be gathered. At least with the Ag Commission, stuff dealing with the agricultural industry is their way of life. Each of us in our everyday life are good at what we do in our job description or hobbies or different sidebar things. I can do citizens initiatives. I know the laws backwards and forwards, and I know how to do petitions. I can, each of us, like I said, we all know what we know best in our own fields. That is why I feel it's imperative that we set up this committee. They take all the information that was compiled, including the Bates study, because I feel that has been one of the more thorough of all the studies and data that's been given. It has reached every person in the ag zone and asked them questions, deep penetrating questions. And that was what was lacking with about all the other previous studies, workshops, groups, and whatnots. They did not reach everybody. My worst fear is if we start knee-jerk reaction acting, then there's going to be some sort of unintended consequences for people that live in the ag zone that may be positive, but it also could be more detrimental. And that's what I'm afraid of.
Thank you. We'll move to the presentation from the city manager. During his presentation, I'm sure the city manager will welcome comments, and staff will also be chiming in to give further backup information on certain slides.
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Mayor, councilors, citizens from Auburn, other people that are interested, thank you for being here. This presentation that I'm going to give tonight is a combined effort from the staff, and I want to thank the staff for their input and involvement in this process. Particularly, I want to thank the folks that are here tonight for what you're about to hear. What we're trying to do is we want to present some thoughts for you to consider as you think about this issue. Rosemary? So some questions for the council to consider. What outcome should be attained by amending the ag zone? Councilor Young was just referring to the overall goal. What's the ideal outcome of any amendment to the ag zone? And what outcomes are you trying to avoid? At the end of the day, the question is, what is the best course for the city and citizens? And we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, but think about that as we go through this presentation. There are potential goals to consider: creating farming opportunities, of course, preservation of undeveloped and forested land, adding to the tax base, also increasing economic opportunities, preserving land for recreational uses, controlling municipal cost increases, increasing opportunity for residential parcels and properties, limiting pollution of the watersheds, and then controlling sprawl. The Maine Department of Agriculture has participated in this process. Stephanie Gilbert came and participated. She's the Farm Viability and Farmland Protection Specialist for the Department of Agriculture. Ms. Gilbert spoke about policies enacted depend on the purposes the city wishes to uphold. Policies that promote specific goals might frustrate other goals. And then regulations that were thoughtfully made at one point in time are likely to require refinement as conditions change. Any new policies must be thoroughly considered, fair to all concerned, and generally supported. The Auburn Comprehensive Plan 2010 speaks to the ag zone. The ag zone objective, according to the Comprehensive Plan 2010, is to preserve and enhance the agricultural heritage and protect the city's natural resources and scenic open space while maintaining the economic value of the land. The Ag Rural District is intended to serve as a land reserve, protecting valued community open space and rural landscapes while maintaining the potential for appropriate future development. Criteria should be based on updated standards that consider today's economic realities. Residential uses should continue to be limited to accessory residential development as part of a commercial, agriculture, or natural resource use. The slide is hard for people to see, isn't it? Public ag information resources. Actually, it's even hard for me to read, Rosemary. Can you read those for me?
Sure. In essence, basically, this slide is just intended to make everybody aware that we do have an ag, it's called an ag hub on our GIS, on our mapping website. Provides basically all of the data that has been assembled during the various studies and other things that have happened along the way. So this is just a reminder of that.
Thank you. This is a comparison of land use, rural zones. I think the most significant thing on this slide that you need to give your attention to is the row having to do with developed. You'll see the agricultural zone is 3% developed. The low-density country residential zone is 21%, and then the rural residential zone is 20%. This is based on 2013 aerial. Yes, Mayor.
Just one question on developed. When you're talking about, let's say for ag zone, it's 657 acres developed, does that mean there might be a 20-acre lot with a home and a farm on it? Does all 20 acres count as developed acres, or just the house lot itself? Or I'm sorry, looking at Karen on that one. I should look at
That was done through air photo interpretation, and so that would be just the house lot would be considered the house lot, and any crops would be.
A barn or, a
all of
riding
that
stable
would be
or something like that.
Would be considered part of the what do we call it?
Developed.
The crop or, so that would be considered developed, the barns and that sort of thing. Any of the crops and forested areas would go into the appropriate categories.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Driveways and parking areas as well would be part of the developed area.
So anything that was like really touched by the hand of man, if you would, non-agriculture related? Okay.
Karen, anything you want to add to that?
No.
Okay. All right. Next slide. This is another slide that shows that information in a different way. Percent land use by zone. So what are the takeaways on the land use comparison? Considering the current differences in zoning, these rural zones still have a similar composition. The primary difference is the amount of developed land. We just spoke about that. The ag zone will still be more prohibitive than the other rural zones for development with the proposed amendments. Lower barriers would likely result in additional development in the ag zone, but still would be more restrictive than the LDCR or RR zones. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. And here we are. So there are 575 potential developable lots. Now, as I understand it, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, it's possible right now with the existing language that we have, with the 50% income threshold, that these 99 conforming immediately developable lots and the 110 could happen right now.
That's correct.
And with the proposed amendments, What we're looking at is adding the 37 non-conforming lots. We had thought it was 10, but by drilling down on the information more, it's 37. So you're talking about 136 with the proposed amendments that could happen right away.
Right away, yep.
You want to expand on the potential for the 575?
So we had looked at the 99 lots that are existing, 10 acres, 250 feet of frontage would be immediately developable. There could be an initial split that would create an additional 110 lots. And the way that the ordinance is drafted, a second split for residential purposes would have to wait 5 years if it was going to be used for residential purposes. That's the way the draft is written. So over time, you could create as many as 575 new developable house and farm lots.
Eric, can you just make a clarifying statement? So just want to make sure everybody's clear. When you talk about the 99 that could currently be developed, you're saying under the current standards, they'd have to meet all the thresholds. We haven't said that piece yet.
Yeah, so that would be under the current ag standard. You would have to earn 50% of your household income from an agricultural use of that land to develop it now. And in the future, if there was a changed standard for what constitutes a farm, to have a house, you would have to meet that standard.
So if we can pause here for a minute, any clarifying questions regarding this? Councilor Hayes?
I guess I see the first split, and that's based upon a property that exists as of, January 1st, 2018. How do we get a subsequent split?
No, actually, no, I'm sorry, the January 1, 2018 was just 3 to 10 acre lots, the 37 number. And I'll let Eric explain the 5-year subsequent split thereafter.
Well, there is language about those lots that say you have 100 acres, that you have to wait 5 years.
That's the subsequent
And that's, I'm assuming, the first split.
So Eric, can you clarify?
So the 37 are the existing as of January 1, 2018.
I'm talking now just of the more than 20 acres or more that could be split.
So there are 57 developed or occupied parcels that are larger than 20 acres and larger than 500 feet of frontage. So that would be an existing house with a lot that has enough land area to be split at least once.
Once, right. So that's the first split.
There are 57 of those. Those could be split to create 220 total parcels, I believe. So those 57 could become 220.
Over time.
Over time. So if you have, let's say, if they were all 20 acres and they all had 500 feet of frontage, they could all split at once. But if you have a lot that, let's say it has 30 acres and 750 feet of frontage, it could be split once initially, and then the next split for a residential purpose would have to wait 5 years.
Okay. That's better clarification, because I assumed at the end of 5 years, the existing property could be split once. And I was thinking just at 2 parcels. But I'm hearing you say if the frontage permits, you could actually split it into several parcels.
Over
At
time.
one time.
You could create several parcels at one time for agricultural purposes. That's the way that the current draft is written. But you wouldn't be able to create more than one house lot than once every 5 years, is the way that the current draft is written. And that's one of the concerns that our attorney had with it.
I have
And
that same
these numbers
concern.
assume just the one, the residential. What are you talking about?
The immediate parcels, the 99 and 110, assume just the one.
Just the one.
For the initial split residential. When you get down to the subsequent splits, the 329, that would be redividing parcels that were divided earlier.
And each one of those could have a residence placed on it as long as it was an agricultural use for the total parcel.
That's correct. And that could happen now, but the 50% standard is a very high one to meet.
Rosemary, could you just click on the GIS link? I think it'll be important for everyone to see where these numbers are coming from. And maybe walk through that as you're...
Sure. So we've created this dashboard that will allow anybody to walk through this and take a look at these numbers. So we've divided it into the vacant lots, the lots that currently have, vacant lots that are 10 acres or more, actually these both say vacant. Yeah, that's correct. And I'm missing something here. Oh, I know what it is. This screen is too small. It's causing me to have to scroll. Okay, so we have two classes of lots that can be split. One of the vacant lots that are better than 10 acres. Then we have these down here, which don't have a label on them. These are the houses that currently have a house on them, the lots that currently have a house. And then we have the 3 to 10 acre parcels. And then there's a number that cannot be built on for various reasons. You can click on any one of these and begin to drill down on the numbers. So if I click on the vacant parcels that are 10 acres or greater, you'll see that there are 5,000 acres. There are 99 parcels in that category. And over time, you'd be able to create 318 new lots from that. The map changes as you click, and so you can zoom in on the map and see which parcels we're talking about. They will highlight on the map. A little hard to see right now.
Is the blue line the watershed overlay?
The blue line is the watershed overlay.
That's considered when we're talking about the buildable lots?
We did not take that into consideration when we came up with the buildable lots, but most of these lots are not in that area. We did look at that. So you can click on these, you can click multiple, you can click like these two different categories and you'll see the 318 lots. If you click all three, you get the 500 that you're talking about, and you can see where those lots are. So those are all of the developable lots.
Rosemary, can you go back up to the full scale, just so that we're seeing the same numbers
Sure.
from the slides?
Sorry about that.
Councilor Titus?
Thank you. Just a real quick question more on that subject. Maybe this question for Eric, because now I'm getting some information that is more clear. When we're talking about lots, we're not talking about 538 lots with a house on it. Or are we? Is that the
Yeah,
potential?
We're talking
So they
about,
could be divided and subdivided so that you could have 538 new houses potentially if the ordinance changed? Or, because I understand you said farming lots, and then you said one house lot per subdivision.
those would be parcels that are eligible for a house if they meet whatever farming standard the council enacted in ordinance.
So you
Right
still have to
now
have the
it's-
farming standard.
Yes.
Right now, it's the 50% income standard, but if
Right.
it was changed to something else, they would have to meet that
I guess I'm trying to
standard
get,
to build a house.
maybe you can't commit to this or not, but one of the concerns I have, and I'm sure a lot of people have, is sprawl. We certainly don't want to have 5 miles out subdivisions growing everywhere. Do you see the potential of that happening based on these numbers, or is that because of the farming part of it, or what's your opinion there?
It all depends on what standard the council sets for what a farm has to be in order to be eligible for a house.
It's $1,000.
Well, no, this is proposed. Now, everybody gets excited about this
This thing is
proposed
proposed.
document.
If we're looking at what's
That's what we're
proposed.
discussing right now. I'm not saying we change it or not. I'm just saying that, so if that were relaxed, all of a sudden, you could have cul-de-sacs you're saying, in the ag zone.
But they would still be 10-acre parcels, and they would have to commit to meeting whatever standard is set by the council for being a farm.
Okay.
If we can just go back, Councilor Young had asked the question regarding what is a lot? Can we help define that? I know some of you.
A house lot, I guess, it was
I'm sorry?
definition of house lot.
Definition of the house lot.
Oh,
So would be any parcel of land, I guess, with a house on it. You could have, we have house lots of 1 acre in the rural residential zone. From a zoning perspective, if a lot has a house on it, then it's a house lot. I know the assessor for assuming value has a little bit different parameters on how she values those.
So it's not a house lot, it's not the acre, and then the other 9 are the farming part?
Like Eric said, we have a different perspective on it. Yes, a house lot, we do consider a developed lot, absolutely. But you are correct that the first acre for assessment purposes is assessed at a higher rate as a house lot. And then depending on where that zoning line ends, if it's in the ag zone, that ag land is assessed at $800 an acre. Now, you could have a 5-acre house lot. The first acre, which is the most valuable because the house is sitting on that lot, is assessed at one rate. If that zoning line, if you're in rural res for 5 acres, and then you have a line and you're into the ag zone because your total parcel is 10 acres, the first acre is assessed at a base house lot rate. 2 to 5 is assessed on a sliding scale so that each additional acre is assessed, it diminishes, the value diminishes. Then you hit that ag line, all the other 5 acres is assessed at a flat $800.
So once we set these up, or once these have been set up, and somebody buys a farm from somebody that had been farming it in the ag zone, do they have to farm to get this discount per acre?
Well, this isn't a discount per acre. This
Well,
is.
the way we assess the acres, the same things, because it
No.
seems like, no.
Because you have people in the ag zone now that are not farming. And if the land is vacant in the ag zone, the reason that it's $800 an acre is because there are so many restrictions on it. And so the
Okay.
market dictated, because of those restrictions, people weren't going to pay a lot of money for those vacant acres. They're going to pay more for a house lot if, in fact, they now can meet that criteria and be able to build.
So once a house is there, it's.
The value changes.
Is there.
Yes.
And so we don't make them remove it. I mean, the next person can live there with a farmhouse, and they don't have to farm.
That's correct. They don't. Well, I mean, for assessment purposes, they don't have to farm.
Right.
I'm assuming that they would have to farm if this ordinance goes through and there are restrictions that you must farm.
So under the ordinance, if there was somebody that built, let's say somebody came in a few years ago, said they were starting a farm, and they built all their barns and they built their house, they would have to continue to farm that land to have that house there. However, there is a way to go to the planning board and explain why they can't continue farming, and the planning board can approve the discontinuance of their farming use, and they can continue to keep their home. If you have a home that was built pre-1960s, then there's no obligation to be a farm. It's a grandfathered home.
Eric, I think, just if I could restate what David said, if in that same scenario 5 years ago, I had a farm I built, 50% of my income, everything's fine. I decide that I'm going to sell my home for whatever reason. I'm moving to Florida to retire, and someone else buys that but discontinues the farming use. Are they still on the hook? Is that is there, say, a covenant on the property that says if someone else buys that property, they must produce 50% of their income from farming?
There's not a covenant on the property or anything, but there is a commitment on the part of the owner that got the approval to go back to the planning board and get approval to discontinue the use.
Say I don't want to do it, and I'm not. Is there any mechanism to force me to do that?
So we would have to order them to go through that process or discontinue the residential use. Now,
But if I sold it to someone else?
That person would still be bound by the previous approvals. Hopefully, their attorneys would pick that up in the sale. But normally, a land use approval would run with the property.
As a follow-up, I'd like, and again, I don't want to, you were asking the question, but I think I was trying to, your point, hopefully I was trying to get to as well, was, is there a covenant, a deeded covenant on that land upon transfer of that land that states whoever purchases that land must continue to farm and 50% of their income? That's the thing, because from a legal standpoint, looking at property and buying it, unless it's deeded, that's really the only way it's enforceable.
There's not a deeded covenant, but we get calls often prior to closings for attorneys looking for the city to provide a zoning opinion on whether or not the use of the property is legal. And that's how we deal with it with commercial properties, and that's how that would be dealt with.
Okay.
All right, Councilor Hayes, did you have?
Just going back to the number of the 3 to less than 10 acres. You know, last meeting we went from quite a large number down to 10. Now we're going 10 up to 37. Getting it down to 10, we were told a lot of the parcels are utility or city tax acquired or whatever. So how did we go from 10 to 37 in such a short time?
So I misinterpreted, trying to go back through all of the old data, I misinterpreted one of the labelings on the categories of parcels, and we were trying to pull it all together, and I gave the mayor the wrong number. We've since gone through all of the data and proofed everything that the consultant did. We fully understand and refreshed our memories of her methodologies, and it is 37 and not 10, but that was my interpretation.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Lozano?
Just going back to the mayor's question, if the property is sold to somebody and they decide not to farm on it, then they can no longer claim the $800 per acre, correct, in terms of taxes? It becomes...
That's incorrect. Again, the ag zone values for vacant land were established through market data. So whether you farm that land or you don't farm that land, you will receive $800 an acre. That's what you will be assessed at. The only time that someone would pay less price per acre is if they had it in a special land use classification through one of the state programs, the farmland program. But no, they do not have to farm that land to have $800 an acre.
My backyard is a prime example, 7 acres at $800. Your backyard, too, is an ag land, and that's what we pay. That's where we're assessed at.
So that looks to me like the opportunity is there for somebody to buy that land, not have to farm it, and be able to get a really inexpensive tax bill.
I would like to add a comment to that as well. Again, I can't say enough. All of the land in the city is based on market data. And we research it, we follow the trends, and adjust it up or down as needed. It just happens that since the reval in 2007, we have not adjusted the ag land. It hasn't needed to be adjusted. We have been tracking it the same as we have throughout all the other land in the city. There is an increase in the sales value of ag land, and we have found that in the past 3 years, it has gone up, price per acre, and so we are now continuing to track the sales, but we are very, very close to increasing that price per acre. So yes, it is much, much lower than a price per acre in the rural res or the LDCR. However, look at the severe restrictions you have on that land. You cannot do nearly on ag land. You don't have all of the freedom to do what you want to do because it's so severely restricted. And that's why people weren't paying as much for an acre of land in the ag zone as they were throughout the city for other land.
So maybe to bring some clarity, I think, so what we're hearing is Karen's giving you her response based on her authority, her role, and her position. Eric's giving you his response based on his role as far as planning, permitting. So Eric, can you just describe if somebody is not in compliance today and they want to do something on that land, what's that process? If you know, once they come forward and they're not in compliance, what then takes place?
If they're not in compliance, what we would do is issue a notice of violation, giving them a time frame to come into compliance. If the non-compliance was, let's say somebody bought a house that was built accessory to a farm, the ideal situation was the new buyer would do something that made them meet the standard to be accessory to a farm. That would be our first goal, to bring the property back into compliance. If you couldn't, then the city would have to choose if they want to take legal action against the property owner. And I guess the only realistic remedy that I could see, we can't tax them differently because of the house, would be to tell them to remove the house that's creating the violation. I just don't think that, that's a pretty drastic remedy, and I don't know exactly how the courts would decide on that.
Sounds like a Ruby Ridge.
All right, Councilor Hayes.
Just getting back to the tax issue, I think what I'm hearing right now, the first acre with a house on it is 20 to 30,000 valuation. I think that's what we heard previous, 20,000 to 30,000.
Depending on where in the ag zone it is, it runs anywhere from 27 plus or minus up to 56. Is that what, 56?
Okay. And I think what I'm hearing you say too, if we suddenly had a number of properties in the ag zone on the market, suddenly sold within a fairly short period of time, that might force another look at that ag zone for revaluing, and that affects all properties.
You are
within that
absolutely
zone.
correct. Yes.
So I think the more sales you have in the ag zone, eventually it does impact all property owners within that ag zone.
I agree with that statement, yes.
So knowing where the conversation's now going and what the future slides are, we're kind of getting into those future slides. So we'll go back to the city manager. If we get to a point where we need to pause, we'll come back and pause again. Councilor Walker, did you have something to add?
I have one question. What is the length of time for the 500 and something homes you're talking about there? 575, what is that length of time?
We didn't calculate out that far. We could, but we didn't.
Safely to assume over 10 years, though, with subsequent splits.
It would definitely be over 10 years.
You have a lot of variables, right, Rosemary, the
You
way
can-
you described it? Can you explain that to everyone?
There are a lot of variables there. We actually went in and calculated, our consultant a while ago, she went in and she calculated, based on the acres and the frontage, what the maximum number of lots we could create from any one lot. And so we can actually, if you come in here and zoom in far enough on this map, you'll see that each lot that is developable is labeled with the number of lots that you can create. So we could do some calculations to take it out further than that first year. We just didn't have time, didn't do it, but certainly doable. But you'll see, like, this one has a potential of 4 lots. It has enough frontage and enough acreage to be able to be split into 4 lots. So that would take, 15 years, depending on whether there's a house on there already.
Councilor Hayes.
Could we just zone in on that 3 to minus 10?
Sure.
And, okay, looking at the whole city,
I'm working on it. It's being a little,
I'm just curious, are they totally separated from others? Are they so scattered, or some
They're
of those
scattered.
clustered together?
they're pretty scattered.
What might be easiest is to look at a particular area just to kind of get a,
Yep. It's still catching up with me here. Okay.
See that. As Rosemary is looking at that, Eric, could you possibly give us a history on 419 Soapers Mills Road? It was a home built in 1968, post-ag ordinance, and it just sold recently for $290,000. This is all public record. I don't know who owns it or whatnot, but it doesn't seem to be, it's 32 acres of land, but it was built post-ordinance, so I'm curious if it's currently being used in ag.
Yeah, I can't do that tonight, but I could pull the
Just as a
files.
follow-up.
yeah.
So is that what you were looking
Yeah,
for, something like that?
Thank you, because I see at least there's a cluster of 2 properties, there's a cluster of 3, there's a cluster of 2. just as a reference, that we could consider property owners might get together to create a larger lot. So I'm curious to see how many of those clusters there may be within the city total.
Okay, thank you. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. Thank you, staff. Continuing on. So in terms of taxable value, here's an example. Take a current vacant ag land value of 10 acres at $800 an acre. That equals $8,000 assessed value. The $8,000 assessed value times the mill rate equals $190 in taxes annually. Build a house on the same 10-acre lot. Again, we're using a median figure here of $43,000, ranging between $30,000 and $56,000. Remaining 9 acres at $800, that's $7,200. And the building, the guesstimate at $175,000, the total is $225,000 for taxes of $5,348.50. Now, obviously, many factors play into the assessment. There may be some questions about this page, I would imagine.
Councilor Tyson?
Just real quick, I was, maybe the assessor can explain, because I was thinking the first acre was for the house, and then subsequent acreage would be a sliding scale, and then another group would be at 800, or would it be the next? Like if it's a 10-acre lot, the first acre for the house, and then the rest of them would be 800? I thought you talked about some sort of a graduating, sliding type
I
thing.
did talk about that. As it's set up right now, you're probably aware that along the road in our ag zone, we have a strip that is either LDCR or rural res right now, zoning. So if this house lot were set in a 10-acre lot in one of those strips, and we're going to assess the house lot itself, the 1 acre, at the base rate. If it has 3 additional acres still within that zone of LDCR or rural res, that's on a sliding scale.
Oh, I see, okay.
But once the additional is in the straight-up ag zone, it's assessed
So
at $800.
that could be from the second acre on, theoretically, if, yeah, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Rosemary? So, farming and forestry tend to require few municipal services, generating far more in property tax receipts and service to residential housing development. Median cost of services per dollar of tax revenue raised based on Farmland Information Center 2016 data shows that for business, commercial, industrial use, you're looking at a cost of 30 cents. Agriculture, forestry, working lands, 37 cents. Residential, $1.16. So it's costing more for residential than you're generating in terms of revenue. I'm sure that this may create some questions as well. I'll hold my comments for now.
If I could on this is, I mean, it makes conceptual sense, absolutely. Agriculture, forestry, working lands, cost, revenue, low, but those are national stats. Is there any way to, I can see where this would be easy to understand in, Iowa, where it's all farm. I mean, really good constant data, everything's square, it makes sense. But when we're talking about Auburn, Maine, and we're talking about, there's other variables here that are unique to us, i.e. what our mill rate is, what our overall valuation is, what our cost to deliver services are, and then obviously state revenue share for education and municipal services, which can and cannot, depending on the state, exist elsewhere outside of here. Is there any way to look at, and if that's agriculture, forestry, working land at 37 cents for every dollar brought in, is there any way to kind of come up with a hybrid number specific or close to within a margin of error for Auburn? Considering you got a residential 1 acre, then you have 9 acres, to use Karen's example, of ag land. Is there a blended rate, in other words? Or could we use this data to come up with a blended rate? Or does the 37, excuse me, does that assume there will be one farm residence on that lot?
We talked about this, and it would take a lot more time, effort for us to be able to do something that is specific to Auburn. Phil, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, I thought you had more.
I would take it from you for that. All right, so one of the points I wanted to make, I think this is dramatized, it's really, we can get into the weeds, but this dramatizes that residential costs a lot more to the mill rate than agricultural and commercial. But I don't know if I quite go along with those numbers, because I use my own quick, in my head, is you have a house with 2 children, I'm told it costs $11,000 a year to educate the child. Does that include education, that 116, or is that only municipal?
Well, I think it includes education, is that correct? Yeah.
So, but it's still, when it comes an actual cost to the budget, if we have a house with 2 children, it's costing us $22,000 a year to educate those children, and we're getting $5,500 in additional taxes. So you start throwing those kind of numbers out. We do have to remember, the residential is important, we want growth, but it also, the cost really hits hard.
Yeah, and just a quick comment, I guess, that I will make. I'm not trying to take a position one way or the other here. We're just trying to present data.
Yeah, no, I'm just making that point. I just want to make sure it's clear that there is a cost to grow in residential, and that's why some people are nervous of it, especially when the word sprawl comes around. That's all.
Yeah.
Councilor Lasagna.
Thank you. And building on what Councilor Titus said, do you know what different variables are included in that residential rate? Obviously, the schools are, police, fire, plowing.
I would assume that municipal costs are included. Brett, you want to comment on that?
I will say quickly, that was the number that was provided by the Farmland Information Center. So they have their own agenda, obviously, so that they're trying to create that point. But that is the only hard data that we have at this time. I mean, we can certainly continue to search and pull that back, but that is just the number that they provided and that we had accessible to us at this time.
Brett, could
Again, building on what
councilors-
Councilor Titus says, I think it would be worth it to really look at all the different aspects that might impact that number.
And my point was only that we need to be very cognizant of the expense involved.
Yeah, let's just go back real quick. Brett, I just want to make sure we're clarifying. When you talk about the position, can you just clarify that study that's being used there, what report did we pull that from?
Farmland Information Center.
So that was the farmland, that's a national number.
So one of our reports used a national
Correct.
data. Which report was that?
I would have to go back.
Yeah, the Crossroads study used that data.
Where else? So,
So adding on to that, we're talking about, water, sewerage, that kind of thing. I mean, that's not even, we don't even know if that's embedded in that.
And it might be embedded in that, if that's
might be.
embedded.
That's what we have to try to look at. So that's why I just want to make sure that we know what report can we look at, where was the data cited, and then we can go back and look at
I would caution, because everything we keep hearing, water, sewer, especially water, sewer. Councilor Titus, do the taxpayers pay for water and sewer improvements or expansion?
What ratepayers cannot pay for expansion. It has to be a local bond with the city to expand sewer and water. The ratepayers, by state law, are not allowed to be paying for expansion. So it would have to be a city, not sewer and water division, but a city expense to extend a sewer line or a water line.
'Cause
Councilor Fournier?
That's costly. That is costly if you're looking at, with the housing and.
But then again, most houses in Auburn, and especially in agricultural zone, just because of the topography too, especially with sewer and pump stations, because they're kind of downhill, they have their own well and septic.
Yeah.
I mean, Mr. Cousins, if someone, the fundamental cost of, and I know when I looked at expanding water sewer, they wanted me to pay for it to extend it out to your line. That's typical in Auburn with an independent or quasi-municipal organization. But I think, you have that experience. If you're having 10-acre lots with 250-foot of road frontage, it becomes extremely cost prohibitive to do anything service-related. You're cheaper and better to do it on your own. Am I wrong on that?
And most of the ag-zoned areas don't have those utilities. So yeah, I would expect that, the vast majority of new houses in the ag zone would have their own water and sewer service.
I'm in a residential zone. I had to pay for my own sewer. I mean, not pay for it. It's not city sewer. I have to have a septic tank. I have to have, a leach field. And I do have water, but I'm paying residential taxes and I don't even have all of the waterworks. So, I mean, when you're looking at that, I mean, it's as accurate as every piece that you have embedded within it and every possibility. Like my whole neighborhood, some have the sewer, some don't, but we're paying the same tax rate.
Councilor
But
Hayes.
you're not paying a sewer bill anyway.
Councilor Hayes.
Not paying sewer.
Assuming that that 116 does involve, road maintenance, for most water and sewer, et cetera. Actually, a cost that I suspect is not included there is that insurance is that, for a community, a community's given a insurance rating, and a lot of it's based upon response time and availability of water. So that, the further more development that you have out away from the urban core, it may fall everybody into a higher rating for the city as a whole. If our response times, I think we heard this in past meetings some years ago.
I know, I think that they were talking about individual insurance can be changed for each individual house, but they don't all of a sudden charge more insurance, homeowners insurance to every resident in Auburn because we have more houses out of the fire zone. They don't do it.
Well, they
No.
could put you in a different.
No. They may
rate.
charge people more that are outside of that area, but they're not going to go to somebody that's not even involved in that and go up in their rates just because the house is built 5 miles out.
No.
That's not going to happen.
Councilor Gary.
Thank you, sir.
It doesn't happen like that.
One of the things not mentioned yet, but maybe coming up, is the more we increase the value in the ag land and homes and whatever, also, more monies will have to go to pay our county taxes and aid to education.
There's no more questions on this. Eric?
Just a quick comment. Member of the audience just delivered a copy of the actual study, cost of services study that was referenced in the report, and provided copies for the council, so those can be available afterwards.
Oh,
Yeah,
one
we'll
other
make sure
question,
we hand
Phil,
those out.
sorry. But I think I had requested at the last council meeting, maybe we have it in the presentation, the offset for when we have appraised value, what it costs us in terms of losing, somebody mentioned the state revenue sharing for education and paying more taxes for the county, where that actually falls. So if we have $1 million more valuation, what does it cost us, or do we break even? I think that, I was asked for that number the last meeting. I'd like to still find out if somebody can calculate that for me.
City Manager, want to continue?
Yeah, Councilor Titus, you did raise that question. We talked about that. We can respond to it verbally. We don't have any, I don't think you have anything in writing on that, Brad, at this point, but
Not at this time. That is certainly something that we could look at going forward. So I'll work on getting a presentation for that number.
Great, thank you.
it is just a comment, it's an interesting question that you raise. Here we are in the process of building a new high school. And think about this. This new high school is going to attract people to want to move here and live here, right? That's a good thing. That's going to raise the valuation for Auburn, I would expect. And I certainly don't want to be in a situation where I'm recommending to the council that we take steps to try and artificially keep the valuation down. We want the community to grow, so it's a balancing act in terms of what we do. And where we have growth in the community, we have to think about that thoughtfully and carefully, like the comp plan recommends, so.
That number, we can have a little bit,
Yep.
Thank you.
Councilor Young?
Yeah. The other part, if revenue sharing still exists, it comes and goes, but that, with population growth plus evaluation growth, that would result in a higher revenue share, would it not?
Revenue sharing formula is complicated, but I think that the valuation is probably going to have a negative impact on the revenue sharing. But we want to try and grow the community. We want people to move here. We want people to see Auburn as a community that's growing and moving forward in a positive direction. So, I think in the future, as we look at these kind of issues, we need to try and inform the council of what the pros and cons are and what would happen potentially as we move forward and grow the community. And there might be some revenue sharing that would go away, but the valuation would be growing in the community, and there would be other positive things happening to balance that off.
Well, right now, Lewiston gets more revenue sharing than we do because they have
Yes.
more people, right?
And
I'm not
also
too
the poverty rate affects the
Okay,
revenue
there's
sharing.
something more in the formula than just population and valuation.
Yeah, it's a complicated formula that they use.
If I could, you said one word that we talk about but we don't define, and I don't think we can define it and take a vote on it, but it's the word growth. You know, and that conjures different thoughts in everybody's heads, and it's going to be unique. And you know, some people think growth is large buildings downtown, and some people think growth is cul-de-sacs, and a lot of people run when they hear the word growth to something that's negative in their mind. Okay, that's just human nature. I've seen it all the time, or the negatives that are involved in growth. I'm not here to advocate for one definition over another, or what that vision is, but during this presentation, I think what the manager said is correct. The state actually, correct me if I'm wrong here, forecasted growth in student population and built, you remember this, I think Councilor Lozani and Councilor Young, and allotted for an extra 10% student population for the high school, because studies show that a community does see increased valuation, increased growth in population because of that school, the new high school being built. Now, I don't think we should all rush to the conclusion that, an extra couple dozen farms and, is going to be where all of our growth comes from. I think it might be a piece of a pie, an overall pie, and where things are going and what does it look like. So just think about, I think, if I could, just everybody think about growth and what does that mean to the individual? What kind of vision is there for growth? So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Before we move forward, so we did talk about taking a break. If people are all set, we're at the first hour.
Let's
We could
take
take 5 minutes.
5. Yeah, let's take 5 and stretch.
5 minutes.
It's a lot of data.
All right, we'll reconvene. We'll get started. City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Kroll. We can go to the next slide. Yes. So, what was the objective of the Crossroads Ag Study Committee? The priorities and strategic goals were as follows: protect open space, rural landscape, strengthen the agriculture and natural resource sector of the Auburn economy. 50% income rule should be changed. However, the alternative guideline that could replace it is not simple. Infrastructure investment and incentives are needed to support the agricultural sector, especially in an unpredictable environment. Need to determine the best incentives available.
Councilor Gary, did you have something to add from that previous slide?
Well, it was just part of the discussion. We're talking about possibly growth in the ag zone and possibly expansion so families can locate there. But there's other areas in our community that we could look at that may be more advantageous than just in the ag zone. Maybe one of the discussions we should be having is looking at the whole map of Auburn in general and see where we could concentrate, that we could suggest areas for growth for people to buy, to build homes and things, which may be a little bit easier on the cost of infrastructure for them to locate wherever we decide, as well, I mean, for the sewer, the electrical, the water, as well as possibly help with busing them to school and providing what other services they may need.
Eric, can you just give quickly what our current zones do for us as far as those potentials that Councilor Gary's mentioned?
Our current comp plan and the last couple of comp plans have really suggested that kind of growth outward from the center, that the ag zone land can be repurposed to another zone to allow the city to expand out from the residential and commercial core. So I think what you're suggesting is very similar to the way the city has grown over the years, with the ag zone keeping land available to grow where the community chooses to grow, picking specific areas.
But there's still other areas in all the different categories of zoning in Auburn that we could add other home lots and things that won't encroach on their neighbors, as well as we could look at what's not being developed in our industrial zone that don't make a good fit for a business to be located. I mean, it might be too small, it might be a good area for a home with land so the kids can go out and play, or maybe even change a zone into an ag zone.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, if I could, you bring up a great point, a really good point that we've heard a lot talked about, kind of, if you would, engineering your core, and that was tried in 1964 to force the 50,000 people that were going to live in Auburn by 2010 to live there and out. We never got to that point. But it seems that, I always caution that the conversation drifts towards cul-de-sacs and residential when we're talking about farms. So, for example, you can't do a farm at Great Falls Plaza. You could, probably wouldn't be the best, most economically viable activity there. Okay, and that's an extreme situation, of course. But looking at the sales trending now over the past 2 years in Auburn, there's very little land outside of ag that's available for someone to do farming with, for sale. I mean, there's land, of course, but are people selling it? We're talking about someone wanting to build a farm, potentially, because we know the state stats show we've seen an increase of 250 or so farms in the past 10 plus years. Don't quote me exactly on that, but we had that in the last slide. Those are all happening not here in Auburn. That's happening around this state. And how do we capture some of that to make our farm economy more vibrant? So I just don't want to convolute residential with farming. And I also want to say this. When I was looking for a home to buy, whatever home that was, I was looking for a home with certain characteristics. And that's what you do when you're home shop. You 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a little yard, a big yard, whatever you want. And then you start culling down the search from there. If someone wants to do some farming on 5 or 6 acres of land, they don't want to live off Davis Avenue in Auburn. So we could open it up if there is anything to open, but that's not where they want. So they're going to look for where that exists. And if it's not in Auburn, it's someplace else. So, and I think that's what we've seen in a macro.
Councilor Hayes?
But it's interesting. we're centering supposedly discussion around farming, but it always comes back to housing. So I think there's a thin veil that we're kind of disguising interests in growth in residential by talking farming.
No, I would
Well,
say, I
excuse
think it's
me.
the elephant at the...
Excuse me.
Wow, I'm sorry, Bob, I didn't know you were getting confrontational here.
Well, no, but I think I do have the floor.
Okay, that's great.
So, and I think Belinda does bring up a good point, that instead of looking at the whole ag zone and saying that, yeah, various things could happen throughout, it might be that we, again, expand out from the urban core, look at our ag zones, where can we accommodate, some, in growth. I think you're right. We're talking residential growth.
I'm
we're
talking
saying
building
that with
farms.
excuse me. Yeah, I think with the new high school, we're saying that we probably are expecting maybe 10% residential growth. People will be attracted more to the community. So we can accommodate, but let's take a look at some of those ag zones areas that we have now that could accommodate residential growth. Keep it, particularly the turnpike. I mean, most of the people that are going to be looking at this area, they look at the high school, look at the amenities that we have here, a lot of them are going to be still employed towards Portland. So the turnpike is our key. So I think that Belinda, has suggested something that has merit and should be considered.
Councilor Lozano.
Thank you. And when we talk about farmers coming here, we're talking about them in a vacuum, and that is not how farming happens. And I had a conversation with somebody today who owns a very, very large, very successful farm, commercial farm, and he said that the systems are not in place to support small farms, the kind that we're talking about. And so we can talk about develop or not develop. We want people to have farms, but we can't move forward with the conversation about how we're going to effectively do that unless we continue to talk about this idea of creating these systems to be able to support this kind of farming.
Councilor Titus.
Yeah, I just wanted to, add on to that. One of the things that I don't, and I'm glad we're finally having this open discussion, because I don't think this council knows what the goals are of what we're even talking about tonight. Because if our goals was growth in value, it has to include residential, obviously, because we already have industrial parks. So if that was, which I don't know, nobody's ever really said what we want. All we've been doing is hemming and hawing over the possibilities. If our goal is to grow residential property and to buildable lots in Auburn, that's one direction. And we have tried in the past to use more downtown, more urban core, without success, for whatever reason, to have more of those buildings fixed up, neighborhoods improved, whatever we need to do to build that core. We refuse to do it, evidently, or we have not been able to sell it, because you have to have developers come in to want to do it. Otherwise, we have to pay for it. So the attractiveness of part of the ag zone maybe, or whatever, is that people would want to do the development that the city would derive the value from without having to spend tax dollars to do it. In the downtown, most of the time, we're looking at millions and millions of dollars to redevelop the downtown to attract more people. And then we're not sure if that's going to happen. That has not been as attractive as it in the past. So if we're going to kick the can down the road and not do anything about this and then go back to urban downtown redevelopment, we're going to go right back to where we were 10 years ago with nothing happening, unless this council puts together a plan that says, this is what we are going to do. We're going to sell it this way. We're going to offer these programs to rehab old buildings, to readjust old neighborhoods that are falling apart. That can give you some value too. Another good point I thought you made was part of the ag zone. This here is a blanket, all or nothing. Just like the folks who say in the resource protection and ag zone, it's all or nothing. No, we don't want anything going on there. Leave it alone. And then we've got an ordinance that appears to say, no, we want to develop it all. There's got to be something in the middle here. And maybe a portion we can select, look at a map, decide the certain areas that can be developed closer to the core, and then apply this kind of an ordinance to that only. But we haven't talked about that.
So why don't we go back to the presentation, because I think that's going to get to that final slide where we actually get to those items, unless someone has anything further to add.
He's been waiting.
Yeah, I do. And one of the things that I think we're forgetting about, we've had people that live here in this city that own under 10 acres. Some have owned 15 acres. They still can't build their house on their farmland. I don't worry about the guy that lives in Massachusetts and wants to come here tomorrow and buy land. I worry about the people that own land now. We've got people sitting here listening to us, many that are probably trying to watch us on TV, that want to know, can they build their house on the land they've been farming for years? This city has refused to let them do that for many, many years. And some of these people have been inherited their land from their grandparents, their parents. What the hell's wrong with letting them build a house on their land? That's who I want to make sure that has that right. I don't care about the Massachusetts guy or the New York guy. I care about the people who live here in Auburn. And some of them live in South Auburn, and I care even more about the South Auburn area. This isn't going to kill this city to allow a few farmers that own under the 20-acre rule to build a house on their land. They can't meet the 55. A lot of them can't. Some of these people are 70 years old. They've been waiting for years for this to change. Some people have come to Eric's place with 30 names signed on their petition, hoping that they're going to build a house, and got turned down because they can't meet the 55 or 50% rule that we've still got stuck in place, that almost 2 years ago we were told to get rid of it, but it's still there. So until we learn to move forward and give these people a chance to build, or sell their piece of property so someone can build on it, we ain't going nowhere. It's just round and round. And that's what we've been doing for almost 10 years, round and round.
So what you've started to do is starting to identify certain outcomes, and so, which is good. We're going to come back to that, and then once we have those outcomes, then we need to talk about, do we build consensus around those outcomes? So we can go back to the city manager's presentation, and we'll get to that final slide.
Thank you, Phil. So to continue on with the objective of the crossroads, and you want to go back to that slide? That was the second page, Rosemary.
I'm working on it.
It's all right. So, protect farmland for agricultural uses and foster productive use of the ag resource protection lands, hold price of working agriculture lands low, educate the community about the contribution of agriculture, protect natural environment with special emphasis on Lake Auburn. Now, for proposed ag zone changes, per 2018-19 Ag Zone Ad Hoc Committee sets terms for parcel creation division, limits new buildable lot creation to once every 5 years. That's already been discussed. To some extent, maintains 10-acre minimum parcel size, creates a provision to exempt, as of January 1, 2018, existing lots size 3 to 10 acres. That's been discussed, applies to 37 developable parcels in the city. Land can be divided for agricultural purposes. Parcel must still meet the definition of a farm. I'd say keep going, Rosemary.
Any recommendations?
So the proposed farm definition per 2018-19 Ag Zone Ad Hoc Committee, currently 50% of the property income must come from farming operations to be considered a farm. Both mayor ad hoc committees, the comp plan and consultant agree the 50% rule needs to be updated. Proposed amendment to the farm definition, replacement of 50% income criteria, 2 of 5 must be met. At least a minimum farm income to file IRS Form F of the farmer occupant. At least the minimum forestry income to file the equivalent of IRS Form F of the farmer. That's a duplication.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. At least 2.5 acres devoted to the production of crops, grazing of livestock, conservation such as forestry, wildlife habitats, specific protected natural resource, at least 50% of land area enrolled in state farm, open space, or tree growth tax assessment programs, and a minimum investment of $1,000 in crops, livestock, reforestation, or farm resource conservation as defined by the Agricultural Advisory Board. So people may want to have a conversation at this point. I don't know. Any questions, comments?
Councilor Lasagna?
Just to be clear, these were recommendations, but they were never formally voted on by the mayor's.
Point of order, they were voted on unanimous vote to approve the first time. On the second vote, we did not take a vote the second time. So just to point of clarification, it was a unanimous vote the first time.
And this vote, we did not take a vote the second time because there was confusion and disagreement. So I don't think there's concurrence around any of these, just to be clear.
So, Mr. Manager, just to go back, the current language that was presented at the last meeting, does that meet these? And Eric, maybe you can clarify. This is covering these topics, correct?
We presented the same, the same draft that came out of that committee last meeting.
All right. Councilor Hayes.
I'll just raise the question, are we going to follow this slide with the recommendations coming out of the planning board?
We have other slides here. I don't know that we have a slide that's specific to the planning board. Brett?
We don't have one. That was presented last week. We didn't have that summarized right here in front of us today.
Well, I found it interesting because I took the materials that were passed out at the last meeting, and I was hoping that it would clarify some of the information that the chair of the planning board presented. Apparently, it was really just materials that was presented to the planning board to consider. It wasn't until the May 14th meeting that I think that the board, really discussed what was the amendments, and they did take some votes. And there was a letter of recommendations, which I went back and I tried to find it, and I couldn't. So I did ask that, the chair could provide me a copy. I apologize that I might have misfiled it or deleted it by mistake. But I think it is quite revealing that we should have that letter, all of us, in front of us, because they do not agree with these 5 points. And I think what it does say is there's some merit in the first 2, but not in the latter 3.
Councilor Titus?
Yeah, one question. This information that we got tonight regarding the 538 lots that would have immediately become buildable or could be buildable over time if the 50% rule was changed, was that information ever given to either one of the committees prior that met? The ad hoc committee or the one before?
No.
Did they have that information?
Yes, both the committees had the estimated lot numbers.
Of 538?
They weren't in
The
the
initial
format.
ones. We didn't get the 538. Holly?
If we can just let Eric kind of do the summary, and then we'll go back if we need clarification.
This spreadsheet was used in both committees, I believe. I know it was used in the MAGARP committee. That summarizes essentially the same information, that there were about 100 parcels that were vacant, that were greater than 10 and greater than 250 feet of frontage, and then occupied parcels greater than 20 acres, greater than 500 feet of frontage. And we did have the maps that showed how many lots each parcel could be split into.
But that was what you had said, if we only changed the 50% rule, you said immediately going forward, up to 538 lots could be created if we're not for that 50% rule.
So,
No other consideration, no lot size change,
and they can be created today, but
as
the
long as you have the
50%,
50% rule, right?
the 50% income standard
But
has
if we change that,
prevented
it would just make it, so that's what I was trying to find out. So I guess my other question is, if somebody can answer for the committee, the last one, what were the major objections that they were against, that they wouldn't vote for?
Planning board recommendation?
No, the
or-
ad hoc committee that just met. What was the disagreement?
Councilor Lasagna?
I think generally that people did not feel we had enough time to really consider all of this. As you can see, it's very complicated, and that some of the recommendations did not go along with our discussion in the end, the final version of this.
So they,
If I could clarify, I was there too. there's a lot of back and forth and amendments put in place to cover all the different concerns, i.e. enrolling 50% of your land was there as a stopgap in order to prevent taxes from rising too much. You had a way to protect yourself through an existing state program. What happened between the first vote and the second vote, I'm not sure, but I know people were just throwing out random motions to amend it, 20% income, 30, and I exercised my power within the charter that states I can control the direction in which the ad hoc committees go, and it was becoming completely unruly with no order, so I stopped it because it was being counterproductive. That was the bottom line, and that's when I stopped it. It wasn't that there was not enough information or too much. It was just, which we could have gone through, because we were working on a to standard, not to time concept. There was just random amendments being thrown out and seconded, which was taking everything off the rails.
So pretty much the income, that was a huge bone of contention, the 50% rule.
Absolutely. But we had discussed using the federal or the state definition of farm income. You know, that was one of the things that we agreed that would be the best practice then to say 50%.
But I don't think the group agreed in the end that that was appropriate. It was, Mayor Levesque is correct in the end that there were many new ideas about what should happen, and I think that happened because people realized we were getting at the end of this and people didn't feel that they were heard or that we had spent enough time on researching.
Mr. Manager?
Yes, and just so you know, I've asked Eric to go get the information on the recommendations from the planning board, so when he gets back, we can take a few moments and review that. Proposed amendments. So we had a legal opinion from Mary Costigan from Bernstein Schur. According to section 60-145, the attempt to limit the ability to subdivide land use is legally problematic. Broadly, any income-based requirements in land use codes are difficult to administer. We know that. I think we're all aware of that. Is a requirement for only the year when the dwelling is built. Do property owners have to report annually? What happens if they have a year when they do not meet the income requirements? These are all some of the difficulties or problems that would be faced.
Sorry.
Staff considerations. These are a couple of the general staff considerations that we want to share with you. Some have already been mentioned, I think, or alluded to. The amendments could reduce our opportunity to identify specific areas for future growth. For example, target areas to remove from the zone for specific residential or business growth, i.e. the turnpike land access. There's a possibility of future industrial business growth near the turnpike access. So one of our concerns would be if the proposed amendments were to be approved, I think we need to be careful that we don't eliminate any opportunity for us to be able to have an industry or business move near turnpike exit, at least give the council the opportunity to be able to decide that. And then per the legal opinion, we are continuing to use a farming definition that is hard to administer due to difficulties monitoring income levels. One more slide, I think. Goals of this discussion, or the goal of this discussion, going back to the beginning of the workshop, which Councilor Titus alluded to just a few minutes ago. Questions for the council to consider. What outcome should be obtained by amending the ag zone? So what is the outcome that you are attempting to obtain? What is the ideal outcome of any amendment to the ag zone? What outcomes are you trying to avoid? At the end of the day, you want to do what is the best for the future of the city and the citizens. I think that's the last slide. Is that correct?
Yes.
I've asked the city manager to come back to the table, join the discussion, so we can pick up from here. I think that to get back to, Rosemary, if you can go back to that last slide, if we can go back to that, this is really where we want to spend the rest of our time, having conversation. And part of that is those outcomes. I mentioned before that some of those were beginning to develop, as we're having conversations. If some counselors want to begin or pick up those conversations, then we can certainly do that. But we'll really leave it to the council, decide how you like to proceed from here. But this is our recommendation on trying to get to identifying some of these outcomes. Councilor Titus.
Thank you, Phil. I'm really kind of intrigued that Eric's not here because I want to clarify what he said, which was even currently, if your 50% of your income is derived by farming, then 538 lots, if all those people that own those lots derived 50% of their income from farming, could right now develop the ag zone.
That's correct.
Correct?
That's
They
correct.
could do it on
That
their
is
own,
correct.
the way it's set right now. So it tells me that many, many years ago, when that 50% rule went into place, it was designed to prevent development in the ag zones. Right? I mean, that's the reason for it. So I think if we want to do more in the ag zone, if this council's desire is to offer more freedoms or development, that's the place we got to start. There's a whole kind of other stuff out there that we've talked about, but if that particular clause is not addressed somehow, the rest of it's not going to work, because that appears to be the thing that is driving the problem right now.
Councilor Lasagna.
Exactly right, Counselor Titus, and I think if you look at any of the research, any of the papers, anything that was done, the 50% rule rises to the top of what needs to be dealt with. The reality of dealing with it, and you can see even the Mayor's Committee, we had a lot of difficulty figuring out what that meant. Is $1,000 enough?
Well,
Is 20% of their,
yeah. And my point is also, going forward, we have a new crop called marijuana. It is allowed in the ag zone, I understand, right?
That's correct.
Could it be very easily that a person's 50% of their income could be derived from farming very quickly? So, I mean, that whole idea, when you opened my eyes when you said that right now it could happen if all those landowners met the 50% requirement. So, I mean, I think we really got to look at that whole picture first and then go in item by item if we're going to continue this discussion. Fix that first, because nothing else, as far as I'm concerned, can go forward unless we decide yes or no to that.
Councilor Hayes, sorry.
I agree. I think we do need to look at the 50% rule. But then again, it was there, as you say, for a reason. It really supported the goals of the city at the time that we did want to grow from the core. We didn't want to open up the hinterlands and then try to support that with the municipal services. I think we're still there. And I still go back to what Belinda suggested. I think that we need, recognizing that we do want to grow residentially, commercially, industrially as well, but let's place residential development where it makes sense. I think that trying to just open up the ag zone with different rules, in the end, I think what's going to happen if we went back, there's 3 state programs, and we heard it earlier. You know, right now, the farming community are satisfied paying the $800 or value of $800 for their acreage in the ag zone. But if, through the market, if the value of the ag zone properties begin to creep up, and I think I heard that we are close, even now, to maybe relooking at the ag zone for valuation, that there will be some farming interests that will decide to go to a state program. I think already there's people that have quite a bit of what could be agricultural land in the tree growth program at the state. I think we saw there's an open space program. There's also a farm program. I think we lose then in the long run. Right now, we get immediate revenue from taxes on the within the ag zone. If it goes to the state forest, I think that money goes directly to the state. Then we get some share back. But I don't think it's the amount that we're now deriving through municipal taxation on that ag land.
Karen, people are pointing at you.
I know, I'm right. Currently, we have 49, or as of April 1st, we had 49 taxpayers enrolled in the special land use farmland classification. So yes, they are taking advantage of that. And we do have several different types of farms. We have cattle farms, milking farms, just hay fields, things like that. So there are 49 of them out there. To your comment, we do receive the taxes from that lower tax base. The city does get them. However, what we get is a reimbursement, and we don't get it on farmland. We only get it on tree growth. But the reimbursement is based on the valuation that you are losing because you are assessing at that lower price per acre. So it's a formula based on that.
So
But we
you're
don't get it back
recovering-
for the farmland that we're losing for the lower price per acre at this point in time. The state doesn't reimburse,
Because it's so low?
only tree growth.
Because it's so low, is that it? Because the valuation's so low?
I don't know why the state doesn't do it, but they don't. No, because it's not any lower than a price per acre on tree growth. I mean, you can pay $325 an acre if you have your land enrolled, for instance, in growth tree growth. And you can also pay, and these are just numbers, don't quote me on them, but you can also pay about the same amount for a price per acre if you have it enrolled in the farmland designation and you have horticulture. They're going to reimburse on that tree growth, but they're not going to reimburse on that farmland.
So if you could just walk us through, kind of, if I could, just to dovetail on Bob, because I have some questions on that, maybe some clarity for myself and if not others. I got 5 acres of land, I'm on the website right now, let's say 5 acres of land in forest land, or 10 acres regardless. That's normally $800 an acre city valuation. So that means I'm paying roughly $237 in taxes on that 10 acres to the city. If I enroll it into the tree growth program, then I can have 50% of my property tax exempted, or the valuation exempt. So, my $230 turns into $115.
Okay, price per acre, tree growth.
Yeah.
Softwood is at $427 per acre. That's what we're assessing, because that's what the state tells us to, and it fluctuates every year based on the sale of pulp.
So it's actually
and they do
lower than the 800 on
that.
average?
Yes, it is. And mixed wood is a little higher, hardwood's a little lower. So you're around $450 or lower price per acre if you have your land this year enrolled in tree growth, and like I said, that fluctuates every year. The state sets those values.
Councilor Hayes?
And then the state reimburses us up to the 800
Yes, what would have been assessed at
forest.
market.
on forest?
Yes,
But farmland,
they don't.
they don't. So if they go into a state farm program, so maybe it goes down to something, again, different categories.
Yep,
So that's lower, but we do not get reimbursed up to the 800.
you are correct.
So if we can go back to the ideal outcomes of amending the ag zone, so our current ag zone, back to what we initially started, what the council initially started with creating the mayor's ad hoc. Councilor Hayes, who built off Councilor Gary's comments, I just want to make sure we're clear. One of the ideal outcomes I believe you identified is there an opportunity to amend the ag zone to create an area where you want to have identified development without changing all the other requirements of the ag zone? But one of the ideal outcomes that you're mentioning is look at the zone, the ag zone, find an area, let's say around the turnpike, right, that you had mentioned about residential, that's where you would want that. So as one of your ideal outcomes would be to take out sections of the ag zone to open up for future development.
Yes.
Okay.
I would concur with that. I think that we can't just look to the city, what's in the city. There are a lot of people who own property, but if they don't sell it, then we can't build there. So, I think everyone needs to have a piece of this and own a piece of it. Not everyone has had the opportunity to weigh in through the survey that was conducted, so we don't We have not heard from our other, constituents, our other residents. They have not had a chance to weigh in. The Ag Zone people have filled the survey, but the other people have not. I have not. So we all contribute to the tax base here, and I think equity and transparency is important. But I would definitely like to see us take and identify a certain area within the Ag Zone that is possible. The other thing for me is, let's take care of the people who've been waiting for so many generations. What can we do right now? What is the most immediate thing we can do that will impact those folks who have been waiting, who wanted to farm, who have been farming, and their families cannot, you can't, I come from a family of orchardists and vegetable farmers. You can't farm unless you're living on the property. It's highway robbery for them. So we've got to fix that problem there. That is not okay.
So to combine, I think Council Walker and Council Fornia, what you just stated, one of the ideal outcomes, Council Walker, you had started with this, was that changing the thresholds so that our current property owners who are farming can build a home on that property.
Yes.
Whatever that threshold might be, we'll get to that, but right now, that's one of the ideal outcomes that you've identified.
Definitely.
I think you both have stated that. Any further ideal outcomes that we want within the Ag Committee, the Ag Zone? Councilor Lasagna.
Two things. One, I want to say that I appreciate what Councilor Fournier and Walker are saying, and that one of the things that I would hope would happen, once we decide the best way to move forward, and maybe that's an Ag Committee, is that the first thing that gets dealt with is exactly what you're talking about. It's not like we can just tomorrow say this is going to happen, but I think that should be the first thing that gets dealt with, because people have been waiting. It's not going to be simple, but it's something that people who know what they're doing could come together and say, this is how we're going to change it. It will have cascading effects. It'll affect the 50% rule. But I think that that's important to deal with first, and I agree that that should happen. I also think something that's been surfaced, and is Councilor Gary and Councilor Hayes, is that this is, the ideal outcome should not just be in the Ag Zone, but we're talking about really development in a different way. And I mean that in a positive way. It has to happen. And there are different ways to do it. There are TDRs and cluster developments and things like that, and those should also be considered as we're talking about this. Because we can say, let's just take a section out and develop it, but there are different ways that you can maintain the integrity of the Ag Zone in this community that aren't just, let's say we'll do development here and not do it here. And I think that's important to consider.
Right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, can I just say, I mean, I appreciate everybody's comments almost. But I think one thing that we're failing, and it's mission creep. Keep getting off. Keep trying to convolute this question with residential growth. Here's my goal. If I could wave my magic wand, I want 30 people to come to Auburn and say, I'm going to grow something, or I'm going to raise something. And we get 20 or 30 cool farms with a half a dozen farm stands. And you know what? They grow more food that they can sell. They give it to the schools so we don't have 19% food insecurity. I think a goal should be, if we want a simplistic goal, is, can we have more farms? Can we have just more, the opportunity for people to come here and grow something or raise something? Simple as that, just really simple. Because it's not cul-de-sacs or carving out areas. And then we're talking about zone redistricting, mapping. And I've heard planning board talk a lot and staff talk a lot. There's a lot of different things we could do to, if you would, release some bent up frustration or market demand, through back lots, increased density in rural residential, suburban, let's say, some increase in other zones. I think if we continue to add all those different things in, it becomes a beast to deal with. But if we just say, we want more farms. We want more farms. Okay, then we can work from there.
So Mr. Mayor's ideal outcome to changing amending the Ag Zone would be that we could increase farming opportunities as a result. Councilor Gary.
Thank you. I would like to look at what other towns and municipalities in our different counties, how they figure out what's ag land, what's not ag land, what percentage, how do they judge who can be a farmer and who not? I mean, we have used some county data, but we didn't get into the nuts and bolts on what's considered a farmer in Aroostook County versus Cumberland County and stuff. Maybe that should give us a direction, or at least That's why the Ag Committee should be one charged with hammering out the nuts and bolts. I too want to increase the availability of creating new farms and helping newbie farmers find a place that they can have a home and do their crops and stuff and add to the good food and our food insecurity.
So Council Gary and Council Lasagna both have identified that an ideal outcome to amending the ag zone would be that we would create an ag committee to do this research, or however that is. But at least let's leave it at create an ag committee. All right, Councilor Hayes.
I guess it goes to one of our goals earlier as a community, as represented in the comprehensive plan, protect water quality, particularly Lake Auburn. But I think we've got to include Taylor Pond as well. And I think what it begins to do is we've got a lot of ag land, and right now it's under ag resource protection. Resource protection, I think, is the key. But we may want not to talk about the whole zone. Maybe we want to break up the ag zone into ag 1, ag 2, ag 3, because I think we have different features in different areas of the city, and we can't consider the ag zone as under one. I think we're coming to not one rule.
Okay. And so you would see this like we have general business 1, general business 2. You would, so one of the ideal outcomes would be that we would have multiple ag zones identified that would have different criteria. I just want to make sure I have it right.
I think so. I think that, again, it gets back to not so much keying on ag protection, but looking at natural resource protection. You know, I think over the years, it started out ag and resource protection. We commonly refer to it as the ag zone, and it's not just ag zone, it's natural resource zone.
Okay. Brett, do you have that? Sorry. Do you have that last? Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other ideal outcomes from changing or amending the ag zone? Councilor Titus.
Well, I'm going to just make, you know, and listening to what we've been talking about in the what Council Walker and Council Forney were talking about, I find it very difficult to be able to say, well, yeah, you've waited long enough, so we're going to change the rule for you, but you haven't waited long enough, so we're not going to change the rule for you. So the problem is spot zoning or spot changing the ordinance or whatever is going to be a problem. I would agree that having an ag advisory committee that worked with the planning board could help make decisions, but this board would have to give them the power to make changes within the ordinance based on what? Well, this has been my family for 4 generations. I deserve to be able to change the rule on mine, but I've only owned it for 1 generation and I can't change it. I mean, it becomes very hard to decide. This board has always been kind of reactive rather than proactive, so we need to have what would be a proactive board, an advisory committee that's going to help. And then I don't know that it can still solve that problem. I mean, just think about it.
Councilor Hayes.
I agree, disagree with Andy to a point. I think we need to make the rules. You know, with the advice of conservation, the planning board, it ultimately comes back to us. But I think we're looking for a board that then will administer what the rules are, and that's where the commission comes in. And I don't think we want to just hand over to a body without, one, defining what that commission is to do, but I think those members should be involved in the rules so they understand what they are going to be administering. So I think that, and they should recognize the perils, you know, legal, et cetera, of what's ahead. So I think they should be involved up front in the process.
Excuse me, with all due respect, though, I just want to say that my problem with that is this council and future councils would be inundated with spot zoning requests. And there'll be this particular case, and we'll have to go on a subjective opinion. If we say this opens the door that the advisory committee can recommend this and then council has to approve it, then it becomes subjective and it becomes a spot zoning one right after another after another.
No, and I don't think I was saying that. The rules will be set. They're only to administer. I think it goes back to it really gets down to how do we define the farming activity? And I think it goes back to whatever the federal form is that has to be submitted with the income tax. And I think, you know, I hope that we'll have an opportunity to see that form, to see what's actually asked for.
We saw it.
So,
Right.
and I think that helps to govern, and I think that, you know, that's key, and I think that's what
Change the 50% rule.
What's that?
Change the 50% rule
Well, yes.
to something that would automatically open the door to 538 new building lots.
Well, but I think we can get away from that, because if somebody has to file that form, I think it's an effort. It's not an easy form. And it means that you truly are into an agricultural activity. And somebody's not going to get, and until they take that form out and show they're submitting it, and, you know, maybe, you know, they have to get into the farming activity first to establish the submission of that form before they can, you know, actually construct.
So maybe a few edits to what we have currently. So when we talk about the Ag Committee, one of the recommendations would be that they would have an identified authority that the council would approve, so we can make that change to one of those ideal outcomes. The other piece is that you mentioned the farm, federal IRS Form F that you're mentioning, that would be one of the requirements, so that's an ideal outcome. And then also heard reducing the income level. Councilor Titus mentioned
Well, I
it.
think
Well,
Want
I
to
just said that's what
make sure I'm clear on
Somehow
that.
replacing
That's what Councilor
the
Hayes was saying,
income.
replacing the 50% rule with something
Whether or not that
else.
threshold is what the federal requirement is, or however that, like, that needs to be discussed. So we
Right.
can at least identify that.
Yes.
All right.
See, that's where if we talked and found out what other towns and counties do, what their criteria is and what percentage, if any, that the income has to come from, that would give us a rule, or a rule of thumb to start jumping off point.
Okay, I'll look to Eric or the city manager maybe. Based off, this is twice that Councilor Gary mentioned this. Eric, any feedback you can provide right now regarding what other
We
communities
can
have?
look at some other communities. There aren't many communities that have grown in such an orderly way as Auburn has and restricted housing to being accessory to farms. There may be some conservation easements that lay out those standards, but most communities allow housing throughout the areas that aren't commercial, basically.
Okay, all right. I just want to go, Councilor Fornia first, and I'll come back to you, Councilor Lasagna.
The form itself is certainly a stringent form. I mean, it really clearly identifies that this person who's filling it out knows what they're doing, they're actually farming, they have to be very detail-driven. And I think that in itself gives me a sense of security that this person who owns this farmland and says that they are a farmer, truly are a farmer. And it's not going to be that easy for someone to come in and say, well, I'm going to farm. So, and because they would have to make up some of that stuff if they didn't do that. Yeah, oh, thank you.
Just so everyone knows, what's being passed around right now
Right.
is a copy of the IRS Form F. It's on the screen of the computer.
Right.
So you can see it.
So this is an anchor for decision-making in terms of, you know, the definition. And as far as the definition of how much money, the 50% rule, I mean, to me, it makes sense that you follow federal guidelines. If you do, this is a federal piece of information here, this is a federal document. So if you follow the federal definition of their pot that they have to show in terms of how much earning power they have, it kind of goes hand in hand. The other thing, a little earlier when Councilor Titus was talking about, I can't remember, between Councilor Hayes and Councilor Titus, I want to remind us that as far as committee work that's done, it's important that as a committee, the onset of a committee is really crucial to have, you know, the city manager set the guidelines, you know, that were established by the council, and make sure that before any committee begins in terms of, this is a real big issue, to set the guidelines, guide them, say what the policy is, and determine the end result. Thank you. The other thing is that the council we're policymakers. You know, the committee is not a policymaker, but the council, that's our job. We are policymakers, and we approve or disapprove of the policy. And I just wanted to remind councils of that fact.
Great. Councilor Lasagna?
Just a couple of things. One, there was, and I think a number of people saw this in the winter, there is a 45-page capstone project that discusses a lot of different models. And I sent it to the city manager today. And I think if people can read that, that'll give you a lot of information about what is possible and what's being done. And they even bring it down to what is possible here in Auburn for that. So.
Councilor Hayes?
This will put a real wrinkle in this whole discussion. I think part of the review of the ordinance should go to section 60-145B16. And this was a section that was put in just within the last 2-3 years, particularly for one project. And this was addressed earlier, and it never really got exercised because the development went elsewhere anyway. But I think as it's written now, I think it should be something that's put on to be discussed if we're going to rewrite our amendments to the ag zone.
You're talking about the accessory usage for recreational space within the ag zone right now, i.e. Lost
Yes.
Valley, golf courses?
Yep.
Okay. So Brett, do we have that?
I have something to add. I think that from a goal or an outcome, I'd like to look at I'd like to look back or look at implementing a sunset clause for all grandfathered properties within the ag zone now. In other words, any dwellings that were built before 1964 that are not accessory to agricultural activity as definitions are now, 50%, I think that needs to be looked at and acted upon.
Karen, do you have something? I saw you move your mic.
No.
Okay.
I was moving it because it was distracting me.
Okay, all right. So grandfathering the current properties
They are
that are in
currently
the ag zone.
they're currently grandfathered.
That are currently grandfathered, continue with that regardless of any changes.
No, I want to look at having a conversation about putting a sunset clause in there, so those grandfathered exemptions end.
Okay, all right.
If those residences are not accessory to farming. In other words, if they're not meeting 50% or whatever the new income standard is, and obviously 10-acre rule, then I think there needs to be a period of time in where that grandfather clause ends.
So Eric mentioned this earlier, maybe we can circle back to what Eric had mentioned. If we currently have, Eric, a property that is non-conforming, I believe the only step that you had stated would be that they would have to come into they have to be conforming by removing their residence.
If they came to the city and applied for the house permit under the premise that they were going to meet half their income from an agricultural use, if they were built pre-1964, they're grandfathered, they could, under the current ordinance, continue to exist without being tied to agriculture.
That is the portion that I believe should only exist for the grandfathered property owner of the parcel at that time. In other words, John Smith owned it in 1964 when the ordinance went in. It should not be in perpetuity regardless of the number of owners. Maybe there's a clause in there that grandfather can be in perpetuity if it's passed down to family members, sure. But when it goes to a non-farm use after the demise or the sale of that property by the grandfathered owner, it should at a certain point either meet the criteria or revert to, well, you can't live there.
So if the council decides that'll be one of the ideal outcomes, would the council also, or mayor, add to what you're stating is that there would also be what that enforcement action would be? I think that would be important to include in that if that's agreeable to what you had just requested as an ideal outcome.
People's houses get taken down.
It happens today. In theory, it's not fair. If you think about fairness, You can't grandfather. I can't do an ordinance saying that nobody can build within 10 miles of my house today, but I could sell my house in perpetuity and my heirs can and so forth and reap the financial benefits and not have to abide by the current use in that ordinance.
Right.
Counselor Titus?
Thank you. That Schedule F, is that what a person sends in to be designated as a farm in the eyes of the IRS? Or is there a process where they come visit you and USDA comes out and?
The Form F is, there's an income threshold that triggers the need for a Form F. I believe it's $1,000 in sales in a year.
Right.
And that would trigger the need to fill out that form and submit it to the IRS.
Okay. Would they give you a number now, like a corporation gets a number for being a corporation, they would receive a number saying you are now farm number, blah, blah?
We don't receive
Diane?
we don't receive those currently.
So how would we know?
So
Would they bring in that form to show that they fill it out, or would they bring in a letter from the IRS saying that they filled it out?
if you chose to implement the draft that was presented by the mayor at the last meeting, then we would have to require them to submit those at least on the initial permitting of the house, and you as a council would have to decide if it's annually thereafter. I suspect it
That
would be.
form you're talking about?
Yes,
Okay.
a copy of that form.
So I was looking at it, and I know somebody thinks, I mean, I heard that this is very complicated, and you really have to be a farmer to fill that form out. I probably could sit down and have a garden in my backyard and fill out enough information on there to come up with $1,000 profit, or $2,000 profit. So it's not complicated, is what I'm trying to say. I was trying to see if there's some other designation, but if all you have to do is take that Form F and fill it out and show 1,000 or 2,000 in profit. I don't know if it's sales, because there's a net profit factor in there too. So if you sell $1,000 worth of products, but you had $2,000 in costs, are you still $1,000 in the IRS's in terms of sales?
I believe if you have
Okay,
$1,000
so, I mean,
worth of sales, it's
I think
not
that really just opens the door to a non-farm. Form F does.
Any other ideal outcomes? Yes, Councilor Lasagna.
I do want to mention that there is an ordinance, a draft ordinance establishing an agricultural committee that the planning board members worked on, as well as community members, and Councilor Young and I participated in that, so that, just to know that that's in place, waiting for approval, so that we wouldn't be starting from scratch with that.
So we have that list as one of our ideal outcomes. You're saying you would like that implemented? Okay.
And just a clarification, when we talked in the last ad hoc, and I think this idea was broached by Councilor Lasagna, they would happen close to simultaneously because one shouldn't happen before the other. And when we discussed this, there were certain, yet to be determined, aspects in that draft ordinance that would require assistance advisory actions by the new committee. So we wanted to make sure there's ordinances in places so we could, around the ag zone, so we could actually draft the roles and responsibility effectively and accurately for the new subcommittee. It's advisory, it was never designed to draft new ordinances.
If we're not hearing any other ideal outcomes, are there any Councilor Gary?
Thank you, sir. I agree with forming this committee. I don't agree with totally writing their charge. Granted, they don't have authority or would not have authority to implement ordinances, but they do or could have or should have the authority to write something, to bring it forth to the planning board or the council for it to go into effect. Granted, they may not have the power to act on their own or independently, but they should, after working as a group, going through past data, the Bates College study, anything, other counties, what they're doing, any municipalities, they should be able to themselves, based on their own knowledge of ag issues, formulate plans somewhat better than we can as a quick, let's get something done and out the door.
Okay. I think we have that one listed, forming a committee plus identifying the scope, responsibility, authority of that committee.
Bill?
Mr. Manager.
Just an update on the status of the ordinance to create the Ag Advisory Committee. That is being reviewed by the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. That process should be done by the second Tuesday in October. So I would think the second meeting in October for the council, you'd be able to have that before you to consider it, have a discussion.
Okay.
Clarification?
Go ahead.
Do you mean we'll be able to view it first
Yes.
before we, and give us time to digest it and then vote?
Yeah,
You're
but-
not expecting us to see it that same couple days, and then we're going to act that night?
No, we'll do what our practice is with the workshop prior to asking you to have a vote on it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What outcomes are we trying, or are you trying to avoid? Any that have not been mentioned, but anything that you would like to add as far as amending this because we want to avoid X? Councilor Hayes.
Unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
Which are?
Well, I think costs, degradation of resources.
Councilor Lasagna?
I think I go back to this idea of this vision in our heads, so it'll be great, and young people want to come farm, and they'll buy property and do it, and I think we want to avoid thinking that that's possible without there being infrastructure in place to be able to support this. Value-added infrastructure, commercial kitchens, communal marketing, there are a lot of things that need to be in place. So I love the idea. I think it's all great. We like it, but it can't happen in a vacuum. And
Councilor Hayes?
Whatever we do, we should bounce it against strategic plan.
Okay. Councilor Young?
Should we consider some kind of quota or so it doesn't open up the floodgates, and, or are we prepared to take care of that if it should happen? How many did we say? 57 houses, farms going up all at the same time?
So one outcome that you would want to avoid then is a massive development within the area,
Yes,
immediately.
immediately.
All right.
I
It's a
mean,
good
this
one.
is,
That's a good
where the people I've been speaking to, they're people that aren't in the ag zone, but are on the fringes of it or whatever, and these things are right behind them. It's just to have people feel calm about that. I mean, they've had the benefit, I have the benefit of having 50 acres behind my house. I don't own it, but I've got the view.
Nice to have.
Okay. If,
I'm sorry.
it's all right?
I don't want to interrupt you.
You're okay.
So just a clarification on what Councilor Young was saying, and we have mentioned a lot of numbers, bless you. It would be 246 houses that could be built immediately, so.
I think that might be a bit much.
I don't think there were that many houses built in the state of Maine last year.
No.
Okay, just put in perspective. We had 28 houses built in the entire city of Auburn last year.
Well, maybe
So-
not a quarter, but a goal.
Eric or Brett, I know you've been taking notes. We have a certain list of the ideal outcomes. Can we kind of recap and give an overview of those?
I had the first one as increasing farming opportunities from Mayor Levesque. Councilor Gary asked a question, how do other towns define? Not exactly a goal, but I think that's something we'll have to clarify. Councilor Zanya and Councilor Gary had an outcome, create an ag commission. Councilor Hayes had an outcome, or at least consideration, that maybe the ag and resource protection zone covered too broad an area and maybe should be broken into different categories depending on if its need is resource protection versus farm protection or some other purpose.
I have a couple others that were brought up. What can we do for those who are currently here in the city of either farming or as Auburn residents? And then looking at specialized areas and pulling those from the ag zone for specific growth, or however we want to review those.
And then avoiding unintended consequences was one that Councilor Hayes had suggested, and Councilor Young's most recent one, to avoid a rush in development in the first year of new houses.
Brett, anything to add? So now next steps, moving forward from here. Are there some that we've just talked about that you want to get more information about on these that we've identified? Are you at a position now to start talking about some consensus towards some of these?
I think we have a lot to digest. I'd like to see what's been presented in a paper form so we can review what's been presented. I'd like to see in writing the, kind of the goals or where we want to go as gone around the table.
Mr. Mayor?
Could we just do a quick poll of counselors to see, if they want to start working on this now or later? And let me just state this, this is pretty good momentum. I think a lot of stuff came up. I think a lot of falsities and rumors were cleared up and more data was shown. Great process. I agree with Councilor Hayes, though. It might be a lot to grasp in one night. We might want to take a break at this point. But I'll leave that up to the rest of the council to decide. I will say that on September 30th, we'll continue with this dialogue through another workshop, through a special session, city council meeting, and we'll keep working on this until, we give it enough time that it deserves. So.
Councilor Lasagna?
I'd like to say that I don't think people will be ready on September 30th. I mean, I reviewed every single piece of information on this and the additional research, and I would hope that all the other counselors would look at it and be able to really have a very educated information about that. And I would say that we might need a bit longer than that. I think I'd like us to wait until we have Professor Eanes' research, and there's also another Bates research that was done this winter that I think would be very educational for everybody.
Duly noted. We're still going to do it on September 30th.
Any other councilor questions?
Just one question. It's been brought up several times again tonight about the Bates survey. And maybe what we need to do is find out what on the survey we want the answer to, because I've read the survey over numerous times. And as it relates to changing the ordinance in the ag zone, I don't see very many questions that relate directly to that. I see a lot of information, but nothing that's going to change whether we decide to move forward with the ordinance change or not. And yet we're putting everything on that and waiting to hear from it. If this information wants to go to the committee, they can use it for future use and growth and whatever. But we keep kicking the can down the road. Either we're going to do this or we aren't. And I don't see how much we can do now without getting the advisory committee, because do we want to decide on changing the income rule? Well, I don't think so. We've heard a lot of information tonight that says that's a bad idea unless you do it a certain way. Schedule F that's not a big deal. I can fill that out in an evening and be a Schedule F farmer if I had the land. So I think the only thing we can do is go toward getting that committee. I don't think that we can come to a consensus myself personally, no matter how hard we try, especially when I keep hearing this Bates survey is very important to our decision making. I've read it numerous times. It's a great survey for what it's intended to do, but not help you write ordinances for the ag zone.
So we're at our 2-hour mark. Mayor has suggested whether or not we continue with discussion, and we can do final comments. Do we continue with our discussion moving forward after a quick break, or have we done what we had set out to accomplish for tonight?
Mr. Chair, may I ask a point of information?
Go ahead.
May I address to our city manager? Given the workload of the planning and permitting, can they drop everything to find out all that information, everything that we've asked for tonight in 1 week? Or do you think that because of their current workload, that we should wait and not meet next week? I mean, I know the mayor has his authority to set meetings, but realistically.
I do.
Well,
I just want to make
sense?
sure,
Excuse me a
Councilor
second.
Gary, all I keep hearing, I'm sorry, is just stall, stall, stall. We just got to do our jobs.
But if they are not ready to present stuff, because you want them to continue their work to grow our economic development. So if they can't get everything that we need, then why since meet? Unless we're just going to regurgitate everything we just now heard.
Councilor Gary, you directed the question to the
Yes,
city manager.
thank you.
City manager?
Thank you. Couple of points. One is, it would be helpful to understand exactly what you'd like for information if there were a workshop held next Monday to begin with? Can we have some feedback on that? And then I can answer answer the question about whether we can be ready or not. Our staff is very busy, but I'd like to know what the answer is to the first question.
So what information would you need for a workshop on the 30th, Councilor Fornia?
I was thinking of all of the committees that have come before us, including the one that we were involved in. There's a lot of information that came out of that that's already been produced. It's just a matter of sending it to us like what we got here. We got the policy that was developed. It's not a done deal, but that's one of the pieces of information as far as I'm concerned. The reports are already out. The original report, the study that was done for, what was it, $40,000 or something like that, that's available. You can't copy that. That is just way too much. That's too costly, but it's there. And we have, I think, another document. So I don't know what other information we should be asking for.
So maybe what we can do, so Rosemary is pulling up the hub that we currently have available. Maybe we can take a look at what's on that hub and to see what needs to be added or maybe what's missing. So that way there, we can get access. Councilor Hayes, while she's pulling that up.
I guess I was thinking the 30th was out a couple of weeks, but it's not. That's a week from tonight.
Yeah.
No, I would rather not. I think that we should have a workshop, part of our regular meeting the following week, up front, part of the workshop session. Once all these materials have been sent out to us, I'd like to see out of that workshop kind of staff's response to some of the ideas that have been put forth. You know, kind of the 6 or 7, because those need to be fleshed out. And I'd like to see them in writing in a little more detail. And I think we need to receive that this week. And then going into that workshop, actually get staff's feedback as to, you know, these doable, and, you know, is this a good approach, bad approach? How long would it take to consider, you know, rezoning some areas? You know, the idea of looking at the ag zone being broken up in, you know, 3 different designations. I think it'll be just too much scatter-type discussion this following Monday. I think that we need, you know, kind of a focused workshop for, you know, a half hour, 45 minutes as part of our regular meeting. Then maybe the following week have a more thorough workshop again like this, devoting, you know, the 2 or 3 hours to it. And then I think we will have a better idea if we move ahead with the actual amendments, or we begin to move forward and look at certain areas that we could rezone, but I think we need a little time and a little more feedback now from staff.
So I'll go back to the staff. Of the 6, 7 that we identified, I don't believe the staff is going to provide any further information on probably 3 or 4 of those. There's about 3 or 4 that we probably could provide additional information. Eric, and can you identify what those are, Eric? That we currently, obviously when we talk about income thresholds, that certainly has been discussed. When we talk about, I think the breaking out of the zones that you mentioned, Councilor Hayes, you know, what would that, different tiers within the zone, what would that look like? That's something that staff could provide some information on. Some research on what currently is happening with other ag zones and other communities, I think was one that had been identified that really has probably not had the same amount of conversation and discussion as some of the other ideal outcomes. Eric, do you see any others?
Some of the suggestions around increasing farming opportunities from the Crossroads report, we can pull those out, include those.
All right. So it looks like maybe 3 that we would probably provide further detailed information on. Anything else? Rosemary, were you able to pull that up?
Yep.
All right.
So just to give everybody, if you go to the Auburn website, quick links, Map Auburn, and go to the Map Auburn website, it takes you here, and if you scroll down, you'll see Auburn's Ag Hub. all of the data from the crossroads, all of the maps, all of the data, any study that had the word ag in it from the past 10 years, I think we looked at, something like that, are all contained within this. So we can add the dashboard we saw tonight, we can add any of the materials as well. So this can be our clearinghouse for that.
Planning
information.
board comments, Commissioner, the Conservation Commission, are those on the currently?
They are not currently there. Some of the, I think some are, but we can go through and we can definitely do that.
The material that was provided regarding cost of community services studies, can we add that on there as well?
Might as well hand around the paper. He's off this as well.
so people can have them.
And I,
Counselor-
oh, I'm
There
sorry.
was one other thing too, we didn't get into it because I think the overlay that we were shown had nothing to do with the watershed, which may be something we'll talk about during discussion, but Lake Auburn Watershed Protection Commission had a resolve they sent to council. That could be in there as well.
Some of those I think are, but we'll
Yeah.
make sure they all are.
Yeah, I mean, because we didn't talk about watershed tonight, so that's why I didn't bring it up until now.
A little bit.
Counselor Lozanya.
I sent the city manager some other research information that I think would be really helpful to include as well.
Yes, and we have some comments on that, which we can add to that report.
So hearing no further comments, I believe the staff has the information that they would need. I don't believe they're going to be able to answer whether or not they're going to be able to get all that information to you by the 30th, but they will start gathering that. Mayor has set the meeting for September 30th. He's made the
Right.
announcement. So the meeting will be set for the 30th. What information can be provided prior to submitting out will be agenda notification process like it will for any other meetings. Mr. Manager?
Just a suggestion, Mayor. If you would, give me a chance to be able to talk to the staff about what we can do between now and next Monday, and then determine whether we'll get the return on investment that you want to get from that.
Fair enough,
that
thank you.
workshop. Yeah.
Thank you, fair enough on that. I would just, unfortunately, there's been too many actions that are just, after a while, it's all delay, couched under something else, and I would not be doing my job as mayor if I didn't provide the time necessary to thoughtfully deliberate topics. If staff doesn't have enough time to provide some of the data that was just requested, which isn't much, just a handful of things. And this has been online for months and months. So I know I've looked at it multiple times. I'm sure a lot of other counselors have as well, I would hope. There's still a lot that can be done between now and September 30th. I would recommend and ask if staff could circulate a series of talking points called down based upon what council has said tonight, and what they want to address, and maybe a topographical order or sequential order, i.e. 50% income rule, watershed, maybe some peripheral things that could be addressed and discussed. And then we have some sort of agenda to work off from there that might not be so reliant upon additional data that needs to be secured.
Very good. Councilor Lozanya.
Are we able to include the proposed ordinance for the Ag Committee as well?
Yes, we can do that.
Because I
Sure.
think, and I respect that the mayor has the right to do this, but I also just need to say that I think that waiting an extra week and allowing everybody here, I mean, I spent the weekend reading over 100 pages in preparation for this, and I would hope that everybody would have access to that and have time to do it. But I think we could wait 2 weeks to do this.
Councilor Fornia.
I just wanted to thank the two of you for taking control of this today. I think it's been a good process. And, I always said, why do we have to hire people from away to take care of that? You guys have done a wonderful job, so thank you for that. And then the
Been a
staff.
team effort.
And
yes.
the staff,
Yep.
I was going to say, I really appreciate the work that you've done, because this is an opportunity for us to see you shining, because you're not usually in front of all of us, and it gives us an idea of just truly the amount of work that you do to keep the records. It's a beautiful thing what we see up here, just going to that icon, and we're going to have all that information. So I really, truly appreciate the work on the part of the staff as well. Thank you, and a good meeting, good discussion.
Thanks. Any further comments? Closing comments?
May the force be with us.
Mr. Mayor, I turn the workshop back to you. You have one more item.
Thank you very much. Next, executive session to discuss a personnel matter pursuant to 1 MRSA, Section 405. Do I have a motion at this time?
So moved.
Second?
I got a motion from Counselor Forney, a second from Counselor Gary. All those in favor? All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, oppose? Abstain? None being? Now stand in executive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Nice. I declare the council out of executive session. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I got a question for you.
Sir.
I got, on my phone here, I was told that some of us did not speak up in the mics, and they pointed out Mr. Hayes as being the first one, and then they don't speak in the mics, and they can't hear them, they got the TV turned wide, and then when the mayor comes on, it blows the TV down.
Should I take that as a positive or a negative?
So
I use the
you're
mic.
loud, and Mr. Hayes isn't, so they want us to speak into the mics.
Very good.
That's a good thing to say.
Are we,
Thank you.
is it at all possible that we could start Monday's meeting at 5:30, or no, it has to be at 5?
I can compromise. I believe in that. Monday, September 30th, 5:30?
Can I check my schedule? And if we can start it at 5, I'd love to get it over with earlier rather than later. I'll check and I'll let you know tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Fair enough. Okay. I have a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
You did?
Okay. All those in favor? We now stand adjourned.
Now I gotta try to turn this darn thing.